Hello YouTube, I hope you're having a fabulous weekend. Time is going by so fast. I don't know about y'all, but I feel like ever since COVID, time is just going like this. Like my son is 16, I'm gonna be 36 next week. I didn't really have any plans at first. I'm 36, so I'm more laid back now. I don't really party as much. When you get older, you're more laid back and you like to stay home and enjoy the bills you pay, girl. But I wasn't gonna go out. Last year I went to see Romeo and Juliet with my family and went out to eat. So this year I was like, I'm gonna just go to the spa, get my feet done, whatever. But I'm actually gonna go out with the girls, and it was impromptu. Like the club called me, and after I made a complaint over the summer, they apologized, and that's their apology. So apology accepted to Inkwell. Yeah. So that's what's up. But today I wanted to talk about more women's history, and I actually wanted to talk about abortion rights. And a lot of people have mixed feelings about abortion. I know I did. But when I went to dig in the history of it, it really made me proud of what it is and what it stands for. And it's deeper than just killing a baby. It's actually standing up for yourself. So I'm going to be talking about Margaret Sagner. And she actually opened up a clinic on 96 Amboy Street, which is in Brownsville. So I live in Brownsville, and Amboy is not far from me, as I'm on Mother Gaston, and yeah, Amboy is right there. And so who knew that the first Planned Parenthood was in Brownsville, New York? So food for thought. In 1918, so this is like 107 years ago. So one thing that I learned is that it was illegal to have contraception, not just to have an abortion, but to have condoms or to teach women about contraception was illegal. So the person who arrested her, you guessed, it was a female cop. And the first female cop was actually from like the late 1800s. So I was surprised to know that there were female cops back then, but I guess it wasn't that many. But it's just disappointing to know that the person that arrested her was a woman, because it just shows the brainwash, and it just shows you how a lot of us are brainwashed about things, and it's not until you research it and really think about it, like, wow, So she was giving out a pamphlet on contraception, and the lady was undercover and arrested her. So she spent 30 days in jail, and her sister was with her as well. And the NYPD, they disbarred it. They violated. They came in and they fired everybody. They made everybody leave. The cops actually made the landlord, because they were renting a space. So the cops made the landlord, get rid of the spot, but it didn't stop her. She just continued on. And because of her, we have over 600 Planned Parenthoods across the country. So thank you, Margaret Sagner, for your bravery. Thank you for your knowledge and your education. She was a nurse. And what made her come up with Planned Parenthood is a lot of women were having unsanitary abortions, wire hangers or whatever. And she wanted to think of a way to do it more safely. Because at the end of the day, I don't think any woman who has an abortion just does it for fun. Like, obviously they do it. Every woman that I know that's ever had an abortion, they all have really good reasons. I know right now a friend of mine from my old job, she had a few abortions, but each time she had one, she was in a bad relationship. Now she's happily married. She has 2 children, one step, one biological. But she did what she had to do, because if she would have had those kids, she probably would have never met her husband. Like, she met her husband she left New York to move to PA, and she wasn't looking for a relationship, but they met and they got married 3 years after dating, and she's a family woman now. So yeah, she had, her abortion. She was in not so good relationships, and she had a few, but she did what she had to do for herself. And one thing that Margaret Sagner said, which is true, that as a woman, if you have children against your will, you're a slave. When you think about it, if you popping out kids and you don't want those kids, you are not in control of your body. And a woman needs to be in control of her body, right or wrong. A woman has a right to choose, even if it's wrong. At the end of the day, most women, it's not all, but a lot of women do not have help. Even married women, they don't have help. They're the ones that's getting up in the middle of the night with a crying baby if the baby cries. Luckily, I had help. So when my son was a newborn, first of all, we trained him to not cry at night, and there's a way to do that. Basically, you have to ignore them for 3 nights. Some people don't agree with it, so then they be up and lose sleep. That's on you. So, yeah. But some babies, they're not going to just go like that. Some babies you can't do that with, and they don't, some women don't have help. So feeding, also with jobs, if you're not there for at least 6 months, you cannot get maternity leave. So imagine losing your job because you took too much time off, Also, back then, I wanted to point out, there was no daycare, right? There was no HRA, ACD. Now, HRA, people get through welfare, daycare, whatever. ACD, you have to have a job or working. You have to be working or go to school, I'm sorry. So I had ACD, I was in school, and it went by my income from when I was on unemployment. And it was really good. I only had to pay like $15 a week. And it was really good, but that's the new age. But back in 1918, you didn't have ACD or HRA, you didn't have daycares, you didn't have none of that. So when you had children, you were pretty much on your own. You could hire a nanny or a babysitter if you had the money, but a lot of people didn't. So, that is whatever. And Margaret had 3 children of her own. And she was a nurse, and her husband was an architect, and she was blessed to have a husband like him because he, obviously supported what she did, and that's a good thing too, to have a supportive husband, because a lot of men back then were very barbaric, and they, it's like you're supposed to be home with kids and that's it. You're not supposed to go to school, you're not supposed to have a job, you're just supposed to be laying on your back for 2 things. So yeah. Margaret Sagner, she's responsible for Planned Parenthoods. Now for me, 600 is not enough. Like 600 clinics around hopefully that's wrong, what I read, my research. Hopefully it's more than that, because that's not a lot. We have 52 states in America. And Trump is trying to go back to that time. It's ridiculous. Like, he's trying to go back to 100 years ago and shutting down abortion clinics. Like, it's crazy. Like, at the end of the day, it's a woman's choice, whether you agree with it or not. I don't necessarily agree with abortion personally, but you got to do what you got to do. Everybody doesn't have a supportive family. Everybody doesn't have a supportive guy. The guy who gets them pregnant sometimes will tell them to their face, like, hey, I don't want the kid, right? So if it's a woman who she has no support, she has no help, it's true. Sometimes things change, which is true. Your circumstances don't stay the same. Things do change. But all in all, it should be the woman's choice. She's the one that has to carry the baby for 9 months. She's the one who has to find a daycare sitter. She's the one that has to go through changes in her body. Her uterus might change because of it. Her periods might change. There's a lot of things that go on with having a child, you know, postpartum, after you give birth, you know, more than just working and going to school, but your actual body definitely goes through changes. Your vagina widens, so you're not tight anymore for some women. So it's just a lot, you know, so that should always be the woman's choice. So, you know, it took years for them to, because Planned Parenthood was illegal, and it took years for them to kind of accept it. And so I wanted to check back and make sure, you know, one thing, my channel may not be that big yet, but I always want to make sure I have accurate information. So it was not 96, it was 46 Amboy Street. Sometimes I can't even understand my own handwriting, but 46 Amboy Street. And it's an abandoned building. Like, they haven't done anything with it. It's crazy. 46 Amboy Street in Brownsville, Brooklyn. First birth control clinic in America. So that's pretty dope, you know, right in my neighborhood. And fast forward to when I was pregnant with my son, they had a clinic called the Betty Shabazz. So yeah, so basically she also said in court that a woman should be able to enjoy sex without the worry of an unwanted pregnancy, which is true. Like, every time but you have people, I'll never forget when I was pregnant, my supervisor, because my first trimester I worked at a daycare, left and worked at a nonprofit, and so she said, oh, if you didn't want to have a baby, you shouldn't have had sex. And she was African, and I know that was in her culture. She was like, that's what sex is for, is to have babies. And I'll never forget she said that, because that's indoctrinated in certain cultures that you're not supposed to just have sex. Sex was created and you were put on this earth to be a mother and to procreate. That has to be a lie, because if that, like, sex is two people, consenting adults, that are interested in each other, obviously physically or whatever, and there's a need there and whatever. Should you be in love? Yes, but that's not always the case. But it should never be. Now, if you want to have children with your partner, that's fine, but it should never be as a woman, oh, I'm having sex because we need to have children. Like that, I just never understood. And I'm like, and she was young too. She wasn't that old. Like, she had to be like maybe 30s, maybe early 40s. She had little ones, so she couldn't have been that old. But I'll never forget she said that. She was like, oh, she didn't even say use contraception. She just said, if you don't want kids, you shouldn't be having sex. And I'm like, what? Like, like, there are people in the world who really think that. And that was 2008, you know, that she said that. So that's why history is so interesting to me, because a lot of people don't like history or they think it's boring. Listen, everything that we're going through now, it happened 100 years ago. How many people do you know right now look down on you because you want to use contraception? How many people look down on women who don't want to have children, right? A lot of people will look at you crazy if you say, yeah, I have a kid, but that doesn't mean I want more. And I find myself trying to put a front for people, because people like, oh, you don't want any more children? And I say, when I get a husband. But deep down inside, I don't want any more children. I don't. Cinderella got her prince and they lived happily ever after. Did you see any kids in that movie? No. Jasmine got Aladdin. Did you see any kids in that motherfucker? No. And they lived happily ever after with no kids. Not saying you can't live happily ever after with them, but I'd rather not. Maybe the man will change my mind. I don't know. But the way I raised my son and my life was perfect, I must say. I had help. I was able to have a life. I went to school. I went to work. I did everything that I wanted to do while raising my son. So if I could get that in my marriage, yeah, we on board. Maybe. But that's the key thing, because you need a village for your child. Care what nobody says. And you have people that will say things like, I've heard people say, even my own mother, she's like, oh, when this baby is born, you got to say goodbye to your life. When you're married and you have kids, I didn't get married, but she's like, when you have a family and you have a kid, that's it. Life is over. What? And you have people who say that in 2025. They like, yeah, I used to have a life, but once I got married and had kids, that was it. Why? You could tell that man to watch the kid for a night while you go out with your friends. Nobody says you can't have friends because you have kids. And you have a lot of women who say that when they had kids, that was the end to their friendship. That wasn't a real friendship, obviously. Granted, yes, you do grow apart because the personalities change. I had a childhood friend, and after she got married, she started acting weird. And she had a good man, so some people might say, oh, well, maybe no, he was a good guy. But she has some internal issues. And me living my life like a normal 21-year-old, and she chose the life that she had. She chose because she had a very supportive husband. She was in nursing school and he would come and she would go to class. And if she wanted to go out, he would absolutely watch the kids. But she didn't want to go out. She didn't want to, I put up on Facebook one day, women who say they don't have friends, watch out for them, So she took it to heart, offense. I was talking about her. I wasn't even talking about her, but she took it offense. So people do change after kids, but it's not because of the kids. It's just them. So I just wanted to share that. And the first abortion known to man was 1550 BCE. Egyptians did that. And abortion wasn't legalized until 1973. So even though 1918 Margaret Sagner did her thing with the whole whatever, and later on she was able to have Planned Parenthoods, abortion was still illegal. So they said yes to contraception, but they were still saying no to abortion. Just wanted to let y'all know about that. Yeah. So that is what I wanted to talk about with abortion and Planned Parenthood. Is deeper. When I did the research, guys, it's deeper than just, oh, you trying to stop. When you burn down a Planned Parenthood or shut it down, you're taking away a woman's choice. I never thought that I would find out what I was finding out. That women didn't have rights, and this is during the women's suffrage movement. Remember that. So it's deeper than just, oh, they stopping babies from being killed. The whole purpose was to control a woman, because you had men that felt like that's all we was good for, is to lay on our back. So yeah, to give birth and have sex. So yeah. Speaking of voting rights, women were allowed to vote in 1920. Then under the 19th Amendment, women had the right to vote. However, Black women were not allowed to vote. Yes, you heard right. Black women were not allowed to vote. And we didn't have the right to vote until 1964, which was not that long ago, folks. Not that long ago. So, another thing I wanted to talk about, really briefly, credit cards. We were not allowed to get credit cards until 1974. That was not that long ago. And so, since we're talking about women's rights and all that, I wanted to dig into Ida B. Wells. So, a few facts. Ida B. Wells was an activist, not just for civil rights, but also for women's rights as well. So that's why I wanted to talk about her. And I got my notes ready. So she was 21 when she was kicked off of a train for refusing to sit in the men's section. And she sued the railroad station and won. So what happened was, I guess they separated, which is, that I didn't know. So they separated the train, the men from the women. I knew they did the blacks from the whites, but they did it from, separated from the men from the women, and they asked her to sit in the men's section and she refused. So they kicked her off the train and she sued for that. I'm guessing they wanted her to sit in the men's section because she was black. I'm guessing. I'm guessing they wanted to, because she was black. Or maybe the man, remember, this was during a time that women were still property. So a man could literally see you in the street and want you and kidnap you, and there's nothing you could do about it because women had no rights. So it's possible that one of the men probably saw her, admired her, and probably wanted her to sit with him. That's a possibility. But either way, she was not going to sit in the men's section because they're smoking, they're gambling. She didn't want to sit there. So she sued and won. So that was good. And the more research that I'm doing, it's really comforting to know that yes, black people did fight, sue, went to court, and did win cases. Sojourner Truth, as I spoke about her previously, she sued a white man to get custody of her child, and she won. Ida B. Wells, she sued the railroad station for kicking her off the train, and she won. So I admire her strength. In 1889, and this is something I wanted to, oh my God, I love talking about this because history repeats itself. In 1889, she spoke about how the black schools were doing worse than the white schools, right? And in 2025, the same problem. I kid you not. As a substitute, I have the privilege of going to different schools, and there is a big difference between the black public schools and the white public schools. The white public schools look like the private schools I went to. Like the floors, I remember when I went to school, the floors were polished. You could see your face through the floor. They would strip the floors, they would clean the floors, they would mop, they would sweep. And that's what they do in the white schools. The black schools, not so much. I remember working in my neighborhood, junior high school, and somebody ripped the doorknob off and they never fixed it. That would never happen in a white school. It's just, so this problem that she had in 1889 and she was a teacher, has nothing. So when she was 16, her parents passed away from yellow fever, and so she took care of her siblings, and she got a job as a school teacher. So she was able to see the disparities and stuff like that, and she started to write. She was a journalist, and she worked and wrote for black-owned newspapers. So I'm impressed. I didn't know that we had black-owned newspapers. That's just, wow. Like, we don't have that now, but we had that back then. How ironic. But like we have Jet and Essence. Those are magazines, but newspapers, that's so important. You know, a lot of people don't watch the news because of who runs the news, you know, but it was cool to know that we had black newspapers. But she talked about lynchings extensively, and her great-granddaughter actually was at the signing of Joe Biden. So in 2022, not 1922, 2022, folks, that was what, 3 years ago? In 2022, Joe Biden signed the federal bill that it is now against the law to lynch a black person. So this entire time, it has been legal to lynch us. Look it up. There's a video of him signing the bill. Ida B. Wells' great-granddaughter was able to be there, and this is what Ida B. Wells fought for. So that's another reason why I wanted to talk about her, because they have been fighting for anti-lynching laws since the 1800s. This is, you know, and it's just sad that it took so long, but at least it's done. 2022, Joe Biden just signed the bill. So now when they lynch somebody and they find them, they will go to jail for the maximum sentence because it is a federal crime now. You got to think about it. Think about all of our people that's been lynched up until this time. They can never find a person. Why? Because it was legal to lynch a black person. It was perfectly legal to murder and lynch a black person. And it makes sense because they can never find the person. The only time the person really go to jail is if it's another black person who did it, or a police officer did it, and it's on camera. So now it's like you have to do something, right? But up until 2022, folks, it was perfectly legal. That's very disturbing to me. But I'm happy it's better late than never, right? So, yeah. Ida married a lawyer and supported her career. He was very supportive in what she was doing. She was very outspoken in the different issues that was going on. And it's inspiring to me because I'm a writer. So it's like, if you have the gift of writing, there's power in the pen. That's what I wanted to say. There is power in the pen. Yes. So he was a lawyer. She was a activist and a journalist. And she is also one of the founders of the National Association for Advancement Color People, which is the NAACP. I didn't know that. I'm like, okay, Ida. And through black-owned newspaper, yes, she was able to spread awareness of what was going on in the lynchings. She attended HBCUs, which was Fisk University and Lee Owen College. She actually wanted, as far as the bill being signed, she petitioned the president in 1898 for that. So that was like her dying dream, and she didn't live to see it, but her great-granddaughter, and that is so cool that that's her great-grandma, like, oh, you know. But and she looks just like her, y'all. Like, she just light-skinned, that's all. Ida was kind of dark, but her great-granddaughter is also an educator, an activist, and I just love that. Like, it's always important to stand for something because you want that in your lineage. You want that, you know, you want your people to be like, yeah, my great-grandmother did this, my grandmother did this. And like, I'm proud of my, you know, my people, because it's like, you find out why you're so passionate about things and why you want justice, and then you do the research and it's like, yeah, that's why I act like that. That's why I'm like, I hear stories about both my grandmothers and I'm like, yup. Like, my uncle told me how, you know, because he grew up in a white neighborhood, and he said how the teacher was racist and made him sit in the back of the class. My grandmother wasn't having it, And so she came up to the school and she had a word with the teacher. She said, "Do you have a problem?" And mind you, this is the 60s. So it's like, some black people were afraid to speak up. Not my grandmother. She said, "Let me tell you something. My son is not going to sit in the back of the class. You're going to put him in the front of the class, right?" So my grandmother was not playing. She was assertive, and she didn't play about her kids, so yeah. And that's how I am. My son come home and tell me something, I'm going to deal with it at each and every time. I'm going to handle it. I done had a whole meeting with his teachers outside of PTA. My son saying this about you, what's good? Like, I'm always that parent, because there's no way I'm going to let a teacher punk my kid, because they just feel like picking on him. It's that. And I get that from my grandmother. So it's just so dope that Ida B. Wells was the person who she is, and her great-granddaughter is carrying her legacy. I love that. So that's for Ida B. Wells. I wanted to talk about Mary McLeod Bethune. Now, she was an educational pioneer and a champion of racial and gender equality. So that's the thing with that Ida B. Wells and then her have in common. So that's why I wanted to talk about them both, right? So also with Margaret Sagner, I wanted to add, Webb Du Bois was underneath her with the whole parent planhood thing. Margaret didn't just do that for white women. She helped out the African American community as well. I wanted to just point that out, and that's why I picked her to be a part of this video. These people didn't just care about their own race, they cared about other races too. Ida B. Wells was for women's rights. Of course, women of color, but all women. And so, as well as Mary McLeod Bethune, she was born in 1875, died in 1955. She was one of the youngest of 17 children of former slaves Samuel and Patsy McLeod. Following the Civil War, her mother continued working for her former owner until she saved enough money to purchase the land on which McLeod family would grow cotton. Bethune benefited from post-war efforts to educate African Americans. Graduating from Scotia Seminary Boarding School in 1894. She went on to attend Dwight Moody's Institute for Home and Foreign Missions in Chicago and became an educator. While teaching in South Carolina, she met and married fellow teacher Albertus Bethune, and they had a son in 1899. In 1904, Bethune opened the Daytona Beach Literary Industrial Training for training for Negro girls, a boarding school. The school later merged with the Cookman Institute and became Bethune-Cookman College in 1929. Bethune was a tireless advocate for gender and racial equality and went on to become the highest ranking African American woman in government when she was named Director of Negro Affairs of the National Youth Administration for President Franklin Roosevelt. In 1940, she became Vice President of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. That's another person for NAACP. Bethune was also a member of the advisory board that created the Women's Army Corps in 1942. In 1945, she was appointed by President Harry Truman to serve as the only woman of color at the founding conference of the United Nations. Bethune's life was celebrated with a variety of awards, including a memorial statue in D.C., and a postage stamp was issued in her honor in 1985. Today, her final home is recognized as a National Historic Site. And I'm reading from this book that I mentioned before, Dangerous Prayers, 50 Powerful Prayers That Changed the World. And the prayer that she said was, Father, we call thee Father, because we love thee. We are glad to be called thy children, and to dedicate our lives to the service that extends through willing hearts and hands, to the betterment of all kind. Grant us strength and courage and faith and humility, sufficient for the task assigned to us. I like that prayer. So those are the 3 people that I decided to talk about. And Ida B. Wells, there's videos about her on YouTube if you want to do more research. She was an amazing woman. Mary McLeod Bethune, she also fought for equality as well, and also was a part of the NAACP. And they're not just, black women, but they fought for rights, women's history. And Margaret Sagner was a white woman, but she also stood for African American rights as far as Planned Parenthood. So that's dope to know that, somebody had to start it. And Margaret Sagner, she wasn't just a woman who saw a problem, but she knew about the problem because she was a nurse. A lot of people was coming to her, and she decided to do something about it. And that's what makes the story so well. And also, she was a mother herself and a wife. She had 3 children, so it's kind of like she knew what it was. It's not like she didn't have kids and she doesn't know what she's talking about. No, she had kids, and she realized how hard it was, and she saw that a lot of immigrants was coming in and having all these kids, and she's like, well, what are you doing? Do you want to have these kids? No, there's contraception. And it's all about choice, women's choice. Ida B. Wells, she had 4 children, she was married. That was her choice. It should always be a woman's choice. And those are my thoughts.